came forward, bringing 5 more talents, saying, Master, you handed over to me 5 talents. See, I have made 5 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. And the one with the 2 talents also came forward, saying, Master, you handed over to me 2 talents. See, I have made 2 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master.
Then the one who had received the 1 talent also came forward, saying, Master, I knew that you were a harsh man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you did not scatter seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here, you have what is yours. But his master replied, You wicked and lazy slave, you knew, did you, that I reap where I did not sow, and gather where I did not scatter? Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and on my return I would have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him, and give it to the one with the 10 talents. For to all who have more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. As for this worthless slave, throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth.
Thank you. I know it's pretty harsh, isn't it? And I'm feeling quite, what's the right word, intimidated. In the past, when you've read this parable, what meaning did you take from it? Yes, ma'am.
Okay, it has nothing to do with money.
Okay.
It has to do with our talents that we have in order to bring people to Christ and to Christianity and to what Christ is trying to teach to all of us. And so when he is talking, first the people with the talents are the people that are communicating and showing their Christianity to people that are bringing them to look and understand Christ. And the one that didn't, that hid his talents, he was a Christian, but he didn't do anything about it. He just went to church, paid his money, came home, and never reacted as a Christian outside of the church, or outside of Christianity of his learning. So when he came back and said, I knew you were harsh, and I knew, I didn't know how to handle this in front of everybody. I didn't know how to say I'm a Christian. I didn't want to be embarrassed. Christ said, no. God said, no, this is wrong. The master said, you didn't do what you were supposed to do as a Christian. So you're in the dark place. And that's the way I got this. So.
Anybody else have a feeling?
And that's what I was always taught growing up, this parable. But after reading this chapter, I tend to agree more with the author's.
Oh, interesting. Any other interpretations on this, or meanings that you might have gathered as you read it before?
I liked very much what you were saying. That's how I take the story, and I still do, even after reading the chapter. It's all interpretation.
It was the same scene, the same story, and you come to different meanings and different perceptions of what that had to do with. Remember that the other comment was that Jesus took the disciples aside and explained to them later on what he intended. But you don't get that message. You only get the first part of the message was, and he knew that they were confused because it's a very complex kind of interesting story that you have to delve into. But even Jesus understood that his disciples didn't understand what he intended.
I'm going to wonder out loud, is it possible to have more than one interpretation be right?
Yes.
Okay. Is it possible over time that an interpretation can evolve? Okay, good. So I'm feeling better about this now. Is it possible over time based on world experience. It isn't. I think that I want to give everybody comfort in that. There's no wrong answer. There's no right answer. There is interesting and gives you a moment, and I think that's the best part about this kind of parable, is it makes you think about it after you walk out of class. And I want to encourage you to feel comfortable in that. So a parable is to lay something alongside of something else for contrast and comparison. That doesn't mean they're exactly alike. It doesn't mean they're remarkably different. It might mean that one thing that you lay next to another thing gives you insight into the other. And I think for me that was super helpful in considering this story. Think about where we were last week. What parable did we say last week?
Jonah.
Jonah. And one of the things about Jonah is Jonah really wanted God to do something. And God decided to do something different. So we might also find ourselves in that position with this parable too. Is judgment the kind of God that you imagine? Do you see the Lord that we follow being weighted in such a way that somebody would be cast off to darkness and the gnashing of teeth? Or do we worship that God that's going to surprise us and not destroy Nineveh?
Yes and yes.
Yes and yes.
Well,
Good, okay.
remember, there wasn't the New Testament. This is all Old Testament, right?
Yeah, this,
This is actually from the New Testament.
No, I understand, but the story is taking place in that transition between the Old Testament and the New Testament. He's preaching to people where there is Christianity as a religion that hasn't been
Hasn't been
established.
established.
So the stories are based on what they knew that existed in the Old Testament.
Right. And what he's trying to shift is maybe their thinking.
Well, we had that shift last week, right? Right? I mean,
Well, the problem is I never saw that was the one who had a single talent. I never saw how it could be terrible what he did, because he didn't squander it, he didn't lose
He
it.
didn't lose any money.
And he was taking care of what was not his and returning it. So that's the part about this that
I
I've
agree
never
with you.
understood.
Yeah, and it doesn't say here that he ever asked them to invest the money.
No. And what their investments were making were not for them, it was for the master. So it was him getting an easy return. So to me, it shows greed, because it says you will enter into the joy of your master. Like, you've brought me great things and I'll favor you, but also it's also favoring ability as opposed to an ability. What is the definition of that? So
And
is there an equity there?
And I
don't
also
know.
think that it's a worldly, what's the right word, aspiration.
Right.
So I'm uncomfortable
Yeah.
on a lot of fronts here.
Yeah.
What warnings do you hear in this parable?
there weren't any expectations. There was nothing, he didn't leave instructions. It's up to you. And I mean, the one phrase that kind of irritated me a little bit, it says Americans, are investing and economically driven. But that's not, I mean, that's a universal concept. That's not, I mean, I don't know why he said that, but he did. But the expectations, I think, was the key. There weren't any. They didn't know when he was going to come back.
Right.
They didn't know what he was going to ask. He could have said, okay, well, I'm glad you had a great time. It could have been like the prodigal son. He went out and, he feasted and all that. But it wasn't that.
What would have been the difference in the story if when he came back, that will say, the first man that had will take the one with the two talents. What if he lost it? What if he didn't make more?
Right.
What would that have been?
Would he also been thrown into the place of darkness and gnashing of teeth? I don't know. That's a good question.
But he seemed happy that they did this, but it doesn't say in the beginning they were asked to do
Exactly.
anything. That's entrusted.
Well,
Right.
Oh, I mean,
Go ahead.
I also look at it, as a risk taker. Yeah, I'm not a big risk taker. I'm not with finances. I just wanna know that this is here and here and here, and then other people are more willing to invest. It's in the stock market wants that. And I'm not saying I'm right, they're wrong, because I really don't know.
It has to do with how comfortable you are with risk. Yeah.
Right, and so when I kind of look at the three individuals, I see three different people and how they approach handling, in that case, money. So I don't condemn any of them. I just think it's more what was right for the individual.
How would you have responded if you were given this kind of wealth? And what do you, how much do you think you would have succeeded in doubling whatever it was you were given?
I wouldn't have lost anything, except I'd have been thrown in ash and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you have to think about these are three different individuals with different backgrounds, different expectations, and you don't know what's behind their motivation.
Right.
Some of them, one of them, the last one, the third, could very well have been poor and, destitute and said, I'm not letting this get away. I'm gonna let this sit here. And the other said, hey, let's go out, let's go try to make some more money or work harder or do something else. But you don't know what their expectations were.
I'm also gonna go with, maybe there were three Sarahs at three different times of my life. And at one time, I want to say before I met my husband and before I had children, I was probably very comfortable with risk, more so than my parents would have preferred. And then when I met my husband, I was not quite as a risk taker as I was when I was younger. And then when I had children, suddenly my risk-taking comfort dropped to zero because I recognized how many people were leaning on me for stability. So I want to invite us to look at that too, because at different points in our life, we might have been slave number one. Oh yeah, bring it on, let's go. And then we might have been slave number three at a different point in our life when we are maybe not as healthy, maybe there are more people depending upon us, or maybe we are suddenly not nearly as comfortable with risk as we once were. So I think there's also that perspective that we might be able to apply into the story a little bit and make it, think about it from that perspective. Does it shift for you anything?
Sarah, I have a comment on this. The parable's doing exactly what it should do. That's the purpose. It's like a metaphorical thing that you've got to figure out.
Mhm.
And it's working on us because we're trying to figure out.
Yeah.
What would we do? What did they do? What did Jesus tell it for? He doesn't explain it. The only one I know he explains is the one about the sower, where the rest of them are not explained. And so it's working.
Get back to the definition of the talent. Is the talent based on your income? So when you said 20 years of income, then percentage-wise, that would be different for each person.
Correct.
Or it would be the same for each person by percent, not by value, right?
That, my understanding is based on the daily wage. And since there was a desperate example of what daily wages were, some people might make a certain amount each day, some people might make more, and the third person might make even more than that. So
So a talent's different.
20 years worth of salary.
Yeah. So for your example, then, it wouldn't have mattered if you got three different people, well off, not well off. They both would have looked at it from the same perspective as being 20 years worth of.
Right.
Okay.
20 years worth of whatever it was, man.
Right. So it would be a lot to anybody.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that
Proportional to each of their individual.
that brings a different nuance to this for me. Then everybody was given an equal share, except some people were given 10 more of
See, I
this.
didn't catch that at all. I mean, I've never thought about that.
But it makes it exponentially more uncomfortable for me.
Yeah.
My daughter runs a homeless feeding program every Saturday, and she's been doing it now for 7 or 8 years. And I just started, she corralled me into volunteering with her, so I've been volunteering there for about the last 4 or 5 months. And there's a different perception when you have something and when you have very little. There's a whole different ideology that goes along with that. And most of these people roll up with a little cart, a rolling bag, or a backpack. That's all they have. And so they line up to get fed. And they'll do things like they'll put a rock where there's space in line. They have to line up. They don't have to give their last name, but their first name, and they get a sticker. So they keep count of how many people are being fed. So they line up, they get a sticker, but they'll put things like a piece of twig, and they'll say, that's my spot, and then they'll go sit somewhere else. And the people that are in wheelchairs, we'll accommodate them, and they don't really have to stand in the line. But it's, one of the things that I said was that small things matter to those who have little. And when they frequently lose all those things because they get wet, or somebody else takes them, or they get beat up, or, I see them, frequently come in all bruised up, and you don't want to really ask them what happened. You don't want to get into it, but, they're all there. And so I kind of related that back to the 3 slaves with the money. And that's why I said it was a perception of where you came from. And the last one was so protective.
Yeah.
He didn't want to lose it. And the others are more willing to take a risk. But you have all these different people that come in, and they start crowding. The first 20, it's really kind of hectic. And they all want to be, first. There's a couple that are always number 1 and number 2, always. And then the fight is on for who's 3 and 4 and whatever. But they all know each other. Once you get past the first 20, it's orderly. So I just, go back to, if you don't have much, you're very protective of whatever that is. And then they come through the line and they get food and they get clothes and shoes and whatever. And frequently they're exchanging all of those clothes because they haven't had a chance to wash them or take care of them, or, and they're sweaty and dirty and whatever. They've been sleeping outside for a week. And if you don't show up, they'll get a little testy about it. But she's serving about anywhere from 150 to 170 people every week.
Sarah, can I just jump in real quickly? I really like the way this conversation is going to show the differential between the 3, whether it's intellectual capability or situational capability, or, whether you're a finance major or you were an English major, right? So, or the notion that they were slaves in the first place. The part I hope you get to is the harshness. I just have always struggled with that, especially supporting these differentials.
Well, and my next question is, how favorable or unfavorable do you find the 3rd slave?
I see it kind of as a lesson in risk, because there's a reason he gave, 20 years of wages times 5 to one guy and 2 to another, and or a slave, and 1 to another. Obviously, the one was new to the system and was probably being tested. Obviously, the guy that got 5 was probably prior performer, and sent him out, and he doubled it up again. And the guy with 2 is, he performed 4, so he got 2. I don't know what the lesson in there is, or if it's if you're new to the system, you have to take some risk to succeed and excel. Maybe, I don't know. But obviously, they weren't just basic, slaves. They were given a lot of money, which is.
Wait,
I'd still like to know where they're dumping their money.
You're 2nd.
I'm sorry.
No,
No, but I just got so excited because we were talking about the risk. And there's so many articles being written in the past 5 years about people on their deathbeds saying what they missed, what they regret having done, the risk they wish they should have taken, the ones that were you know, the things were so simple. If I had just done this, and about 2 years ago, they did this fascinating article on the people that did at the age of 70 or 80 took that risk, and how all of them were successful. And the risk they decided to take at that time. And I think that's very important for us to realize that risk-taking is part of life. And if we don't go forward, we don't move, we don't grow. And when you were talking about your risk as before you were married, each time you didn't realize maybe, but you were taking huge risk. Having children is a giant risk. Getting married is a gigantic risk. So I think but anyway, I think it's exciting. I'm excited about this bureau.
Wait, what were you gonna add?
Oh, sure, I was just gonna say, I look at this thing in the context of the Bible, and over again, in the Gospels and in Paul's writing, there's the theme of multiplication. Jesus gets a small amount of bread and fish, and he multiplies it. Paul talks about spiritual gifts, talks about the fruit of the Spirit. They talk about the mustard seed, which grows and then multiplies. And for me, I place this within that general context, that line that's there, that it's a case of multiplying. Whatever you're given, have you at least made an effort to use it and to multiply it? To me, I think that's consistent with what Jesus does and what Paul writes. It's, whatever you've got, whether you have a lot or just a little, do you at least try to use that and multiply it? That's just my observation.
Yes, ma'am, you were gonna
I
add.
think it's interesting that our word talent and the word talent for the money is apparently the same word, but it confuses us in our head. But I think that there's something about the fact that our talent needs to be operated in order to
Acted on, or activated?
And so this third slave did not do anything using his own ability, whatever amount of ability he might have had. And what the owner said was, you should have at least put it in the bank. And I thought about it, that it says he dug a hole and put the money in the bowl. Now, my thought about that is maybe somebody could have seen him do that and go get the money, and I watch too much television. Anyway. But anyway, the point is, the least risk that he could have taken was to put it in the bank,
You were gonna
where they
go,
would have interest to pay back.
let me go here first and then you.
So, to me, it's about obedience, right? Like, to me, they were all doing a job. The first two ran out immediately and did the job that they were supposed to do. The third one did not do that. I mean, the word to me that sticks out is he ought to have. I interpret that as he was supposed to do that, but he knowingly did not. So, any compassion I might have for the third slave is lessened, because to me, he didn't do what he was supposed to do.
So what if he had invested it in the bank and the bank failed? Then what would the consequences have been?
It actually cheats.
Here's this question I have, because the master replied, "You wicked and lazy slave." And of course, it was his property. It was entrusted to them. It wasn't given to them. But he said, "You knew, did you, that I reap where I did not sow and gather where I did not scatter?" And of course, in the reading, he was interpreting that to imply that the master was not a good guy. And so that's the whole, so the rich interpretation, is this the analogy of God's gifts to us, or is this an earthly bad master who is corrupt? So it can go either way.
And that's the next question.
Breaking Bad.
Yeah.
So I find it interesting, and this is, I'm reading Josh's words, that the master does not refute anything that the third slave says.
Well, remember, he didn't give them any direction. There was no expectation. They were workers. And he said, you you reaped where you didn't sow. So you have to kind of guess that maybe the others went out and they sowed and planted in other areas that weren't presently being cultivated. Maybe. Maybe they did something else. But you have to infer that perhaps the third slave didn't go out and do anything new. He just continued to cultivate what the master already had, and he saved the money.
So why doesn't the master rebut the accusations of the third
Are you
slave?
sure he doesn't? He says, you knew, did you? Isn't he questioning, isn't he responding, saying, you think that's true? I mean,
Yeah.
do we have a sense as to whether the master was someone who reaped what he did sow?
No, we don't.
That's what I said,
We
there's
don't
no
have
expectation.
information about the master other than he gave this money out. Yeah.
I think, interesting key idea, he uses the word lens. What kind of lens do we use to put over this? This story is very, very familiar. And we have a lens that we're very, very used to. And in the discussion today, we have been very reluctant to let it go. And in the lens that he uses, one of the questions that he raises is, what about the image of God? What kind of image of God do we have in our familiar lens? It's a use it or lose it God. If we don't use it, what we've been given, we lose it. And it's a very harsh, punishing God. Is that the image that we want? And
Great question.
And he even confesses, I used to have that image. That was the lens I used. I don't want that image. And then he uses interesting quotes about Jesus and other parts of Luke about who God is. Passionate, forgiving, loving. If that's our image of God, what's the different lens that we need to use? And I thought, no, that, to me, in this whole book, because what are the different lenses that we need to use that may make us, you used the beginning of the class, may make us uncomfortable. You may not like them. May make us uncomfortable, but within the context of the time and the question about the image of God, with the lenses that we use, we need to struggle with that.
Well, I guess the question is, do we see the landowner as God?
No, the system. He's the system, and the slaves operate in the system. And his number 7 question is relates to this kind of the economics of wherever you're going to live. The lesson I think is in economics, maybe also here is wherever system you live under, you have to take risks to succeed or do something to be in the grace of the system, as it says in land.
See, they're never told if this is going to have to be repaid or not.
Yeah.
This is a gift, and
I don't think they get it.
It was
It's not there.
entrusted. It's entrusted.
no, I understand, but there's not an expectation that's identified there. And I think it probably has to do with being a good steward of the gifts that you were given. And either you protect them, you multiply them, or you do something with them. And I sort of related back to, I grew up in the military, and so every 2 or 3 years we moved. And so I remember distinctly my mother coming in to each of my brothers and sisters' bedroom and said, okay, pick out 10 things. And I said, 10 things, like there's all this stuff and this and this and this and this. And she said, no, we're moving, the moving truck's coming in a couple days. You pick out 10 things. And the rest of it is going to go somewhere else. So you kind of, you start thinking about that. And it goes back to what I said earlier, with you have little you very appreciate what those little things are. And every time there's a move, that 10 got smaller and smaller and smaller.
Yeah.
To the point when we finally left Germany, there was one suitcase.
I'm gonna, go ahead.
I just was wondering how this parable may relate to the story of Jesus responding to the scholar, the learned scholar. How did I get to heaven? You give up everything, you own, and come follow me. Now, where's the risk in that?
That's a big risk for a person that holds on to money type.
Sarah.
Yes, sir.
I'm hearing all that's being said, and I don't want to dismiss it, but I would offer a word of caution. One of the principles of biblical interpretation is to interpret Scripture in the light of Scripture. Look at the larger context. This, you noted, this is the last week, okay? And Jesus begins to talk about being watchful and mindful, and the preceding parable is the Bible labels them wise and foolish. The foolish virgins did not prepare. Then this parable, and then the one that follows it is one we all love, the sheep and goats. My word of caution, what I don't understand is, in each of those other instances, you may want to call it harshness, I would call it reality testing. If you don't prepare for something, if you don't read the signs of the times, there are consequences. I don't see that as God's harshness. I see that as we live in a world where what we decide to do matters. And then there's the sheep and the goats. You talk about harshness, it ends up very harsh. Outer darkness or whatever it says. My concern about this is I am all for economic justice. I would not use this parable to promote that. In seminary, one of my Hebrew professors was a devoted pacifist. Every time he talked about pacifism, he would say, I do not use one of the 10 commandments to support pacifism. It does not say thou shalt not kill. It says thou shalt not commit murder. So he said, don't use that to support pacifism. So I wouldn't use it. I think the overall story is it matters what you do. Now, the other principle about parables is don't go too far with every detail. So I'm in favor of opening our minds. Hopefully we try to do that on our weekly podcast. I'm in favor of that. I just have I cannot embrace that the third slave is a symbol of Jesus Christ. Not yet.
Well, I think that's and we don't have very long left, but, yes.
Sarah, for me, I wonder, is there a legitimate role for divine judgment? That's a question I would raise. You know, we tend to say, oh, no, God is love, and we're New Testament people. But when the Bible talks about injustice, the Bible talks about kings that are evil, there's a pleading from the oppressed people that God would judge them, that God would judge those who are oppressing his people. So like here, is there a judgment that is acceptable if we do not use what we're given for the common good? Is that legitimate? That's just going through my mind. Because if I just, God is love, you're not going to judge anything. But wait a minute, what if there's the evil of war, the evil of poverty, the evil of abuse? There's some things that are just really bad in our world. And I would think that if I read the Bible, that God would say, if you're a maker of war intentionally, you should be judged. If you beat your spouse, you should be judged. You know, if you support segregation or whole clamping down on racists, you should be judged. And I think that's legitimate. So that's a question that's in my mind. How can I believe in a loving God who also, in certain situations, judges? And that raises this thing too. You know, if you don't use what you're given, am I liable to be judged for that? Or will he say, oh, no, I just love you, I just love you? You know, so again, that's something for me.
I'm two thoughts on this. First, I want to make sure we touch base with what Josh is proposing, which is Jesus the third slave? Is Jesus walking through a system crafted by men or by people, by humanity, and is become the third slave for failure to engage in the way things work in this world?
Let me ask you another question. Suppose you flipped it, and the first guy lost all the money, second guy lost his money, but the third guy had all the money because he took care of it. So we worry about risk. And what happens, it seems like a dream world that, hey, these guys, hey, doubled them. That's hard to do.
It is very hard to do.
What if you think about the landowner as being Jesus? He gave you a gift. He gave you 3 different gifts.
But it runs contrary to how I understand Jesus to be.
Just a minute.
Okay.
Let me finish here. There's 3 gifts. And if you don't use the gifts, then there's repercussions. Okay? And so the third is saying, I don't think that the punishment is as much the issue as if you don't use your gifts, there are consequences. Not that you're going to be beaten or, you know, whatever, but the concept of understanding, going back to what Reverend Hall says, is biblical. If you don't use your gifts wisely, there are consequences. And it's not a matter of being mean. It's not a matter of you're going to beat the hell out of you. It's not that. It's use the gifts that you're given wisely. At least that's my thought.
What you got, Ed?
I don't think the behavior of any of these people makes any sense.
Thank you, Ed.
And who are we to judge? Anyone sorting them out, anything like that. I mean, the famous quote of our present Pope is, who am I to judge? And I think we see things, sketchy details and so forth, and we try to figure out what's going on. We can't figure out what's going on, even from what we've been told. And I think, to me, the lesson is back off, do what I'm supposed to do, and don't try to sort out the rest of it.
And on that note, I hope that this parable will give you thoughts during the week as well. It certainly has caused me to trip over my feet a couple of times this week. And I bid you a good Sunday, and I hope that you have a wonderful worship service. If you're going that way, if you've already been to worship, well then have a great lunch and have some time with your family this afternoon, or perhaps sit in your garden and garden, or whatever you would like to do. Try to find some cool air, some cold water. Thank you, Sarah.